The morning begins with an unsettling stillness as Emma watches her stepdad drive her younger brother to school in his new car. The rain outside mirrors the storm brewing in her heart. As the cold droplets hit the bus window, she feels the weight of abandonment and the unspoken distance between her and the family she once thought she knew. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain. Emma sat at the kitchen table, eyes glued to the window, watching her stepdad, Greg, carefully adjust his rearview mirror. He was in a hurry this morning. She could tell by the way his movements were sharp, quick. His voice, usually warm and fatherly, sounded a little strained as he called out to her brother, Jack. "Ready to go, kiddo?" Greg's words were clipped, more out of routine than genuine enthusiasm. Jack nodded, his face lit with excitement, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. Emma watched as her younger brother climbed into the passenger seat of the brand-new car. It was sleek and polished, gleaming even under the dim morning light. The car that wasn't for her. She couldn't remember the last time Greg had bought her anything. It used to be that they'd share everything, the little gifts, the jokes, the glances that meant more than words ever could. But those days felt like distant memories now. The rain began to tap against the window, soft at first, then harder, as if the sky itself shared her sadness. Her hands tightened around the coffee mug, but the warmth didn't reach her cold fingers. The house felt emptier than ever. She sat there, alone, caught between the suffocating silence and the roar of her own thoughts. Hadn't realized how much she'd been holding on to this. The way Greg had promised her everything when he first married her mother, the way he used to be her rock. But now, he didn't even seem to notice her anymore. The more she tried to get closer, the further he pushed her away, as if someone had come between them. The car's engine purred to life, a sound that seemed to mock her. She was left in the dust, the same old bus ride awaiting her. She watched them pull away, the shiny car disappearing down the street, and for a moment she felt a strange pang in her chest, something she didn't have the words for. It was more than just jealousy, more than simple resentment. It was a feeling of being invisible, a feeling she had been trying to ignore, but was now impossible to dismiss. The cold air that followed them out, the door cut through her, a gust of wind that seemed to carry every word she hadn't said. Emma's heart sank. Her mind kept asking, how did we get here? She stood up, her knees a little unsteady, and grabbed her bag. The sound of the rain growing louder against the roof was like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. The truth was impossible to avoid. Things were changing, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. But what could she do? She was no longer the daughter Greg doted on. She was just a shadow in the background of their happy little family. The bus would be here soon. It always came at the same time, but today it felt like it was taking forever. She grabbed her umbrella and made her way to the door, trying to ignore the knot forming in her stomach. She could feel the weight of everything: her stepdad's new car, her brother's laughter in the front seat bearing down on her. The rain was relentless, the droplets drumming on her umbrella like 1,000 tiny fingers tapping for attention. The bus was late. Emma stood at the corner, her shoes sinking slightly into the wet pavement, each minute dragging on longer than the last. It felt like the universe was taunting her, making her wait for something that would never come. As the bus finally appeared in the distance, Emma let out a soft breath she didn't know she was holding. She climbed aboard, the familiar squeak of the steps beneath her feet sounding louder than usual. She didn't bother looking for an empty seat. She simply slid into the first one she could find. Her eyes stared out the window, not really seeing anything. The world beyond was blurred, washed out by the sheets of rain, but in her mind it was crystal clear. She wasn't just angry at Greg. She was angry at herself for allowing it to hurt so much. Why do I care? She wondered. Why does it feel like he's slipping away, taking everything I loved with him? The bus jolted forward, and Emma could feel the motion in her bones. The rain splattered against the glass, so close it looked as though the entire world was drowning in gray. It was a sharp contrast to the shiny new car that had pulled away moments before. She could still hear it in her mind, the rev of the engine, the soft laughter of her brother. It was as though the world outside was moving forward while she was stuck in the past, waiting for something that would never come back. The bus ride was long, but Emma barely noticed the time pass. Her thoughts swirled, tangled up in a mess of emotions she couldn't name. Why wasn't she enough? She wondered. She had tried to be good, to be the daughter Greg always wanted. But no matter how hard she tried, it felt like she was invisible. She wasn't the child anymore. She wasn't the one Greg took care of. The moment she stepped off the bus, she was greeted by the same gray sky and the same cold wind. She pulled her coat tighter around her, the rain making her feel smaller, more insignificant. The walk to school felt endless. Her footsteps seemed so loud against the silence of the streets, but she couldn't shake the feeling that no one was listening, no one cared. It wasn't just the rain. It was everything. The fact that Greg had chosen today, of all days, to drive Jack to school in that damn new car made it all feel more final. Like a line had been drawn, and she was on the other side of it. She reached the school gates and paused for a moment. The world was noisy again, full of laughter and chatter. But Emma felt disconnected from it all. The morning had stripped her of whatever energy she had left as she walked into the school building. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, a moment when everything would change, when all the things she had been ignoring would come to the surface. And she had no idea if she was ready for it. The hallways of the school felt like they were closing in on Emma as she walked from class to class. Each step echoed in her mind, the sound magnified by the heavy silence that surrounded her. The day after the awkward morning with her stepdad had been unbearable. Every glance from her classmates felt like pity, every word from her teachers distant. She could feel the invisible walls growing taller, separating her from everything she once felt connected to. The weight of yesterday's events pressed down on her, and all she could think about was the feeling of being invisible, the sensation of watching her family drift away. Her brother, wrapped up in the excitement of Greg's new car, was miles away in a world she couldn't reach. And Greg, her stepdad, was no better. She could barely look at him without feeling the sting of rejection. But as she rounded the corner near the courtyard, something unexpected happened. Luke was leaning against the brick wall by the large oak tree, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. He wasn't like the other students. There was something about him, something calming, like he didn't belong to the chaos of high school life. His eyes, dark and knowing, caught hers for just a moment, but it was enough. He was standing there, an open invitation to the world that she didn't know she was seeking. Emma's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly looked away, unsure of why the sight of him left her so unsettled. She tried to walk past, head down, but something pulled her back, like an invisible thread tying her to him. His voice, soft and almost hesitant, broke the silence. "Hey," he said, his tone low, but the way it slid into her ears made her pause. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his expression, a quiet, knowing look that made her feel like he understood exactly what was going through her mind. She could feel her pulse quicken, and before she could stop herself, she said, "Hi." The word came out sounding too small, too fragile, but Luke didn't seem to notice. He took a step forward, his movements deliberate, but not rushed. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that Emma hadn't expected. She hesitated, unsure whether to brush him off or to reveal more. For a moment, she considered walking away, hiding behind the walls she had so carefully built. But something in his eyes made her stay. Something told her he wouldn't judge her. It's just everything, Emma said softly, biting her lip. Everything feels off lately. Luke nodded, his eyes narrowing as if he understood all too well. He took another step toward her, his presence calm but intense. I get it, he said, his voice steady and full of quiet empathy. Sometimes life feels like it's just happening around you. Like you're stuck in the middle, watching everything else move on without you. The way he spoke felt like he had lived those words. Emma swallowed hard, unsure of how much she was willing to reveal. But Luke wasn't pushing. He wasn't asking her to pour out her soul. He was simply offering the space to breathe. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she said, her voice trembling with vulnerability she hadn't intended to show. I don't even know you. Luke smiled, a small, genuine smile that made Emma's heart flutter unexpectedly. Maybe that's the point, he said, leaning against the tree with a relaxed ease. Sometimes talking to a stranger feels easier. You don't have to worry about the weight of their expectations. Emma's chest tightened, the walls she had built crumbling just a little bit. You're right, she murmured, feeling an odd sense of relief in his words. Everything just feels so heavy. They stood in silence for a moment, the rustling of leaves the only sound between them. Emma wasn't sure what had drawn her to him. Perhaps it was the way he seemed so different from everyone else. Or maybe it was the quiet understanding in his eyes that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in so long. The first time in what felt like weeks, Emma felt like someone might truly understand the turmoil inside her. She wasn't invisible to him. And in that moment, it felt like the storm in her chest had calmed, if only for a little while. I'm Luke, he said after a pause, breaking the silence and offering his hand, that Emma hesitated for only a second before she reached out to shake it, her fingers brushing against his, sending a small spark of warmth through her. Emma, she said, the name tasting foreign on her tongue. Nice to meet you. Emma, Luke said, his voice softer now, more sincere. They stood there for a few more moments, neither of them saying anything, but somehow feeling like they had shared something unspoken, something deep. It was strange. Emma had never felt this kind of connection with anyone so quickly before. Luke wasn't like the others. He wasn't like Greg or Jack or anyone who had ever made her feel less than. She opened her mouth to speak, but the bell rang, signaling the end of the break. Luke gave her a small nod, as if to say goodbye, but before he could turn away, Emma blurted out, "Are you new here?" Luke shrugged. "Yeah, I just transferred. Figured I'd check this place out." Emma nodded, unsure of how to respond. It felt like there was so much more to say, but the moment was slipping away, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to let go. I'll see you around," she said, her voice quieter now. Luke smiled again, a small but knowing grin. "I'm sure of it," he said before he turned and walked away. Disappearing into the crowd, Dama stood still for a moment, her heart racing in a way she couldn't explain. She hadn't expected this spark, this connection that felt so effortless, so natural. It was a feeling she hadn't had in so long, a feeling of being seen, understood, and maybe even cared for. She couldn't shake the thought that there was something more between them, something that hadn't yet been fully realized. As she turned to walk toward her next class, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen if she let this feeling grow, if she allowed herself to be open to something new. For the first time in days, Emma felt like there was hope for something more than the silence and distance she had been living with. The days blurred together in a haze of lectures, empty glances, and quiet, unspoken tension. Emma tried to bury herself in the routine of school, focusing on her studies. But every time her eyes met Luke's, whether across the hall or in passing between classes, her heart would flutter in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. It was as though the world around them faded, leaving only the two of them in a space that felt uniquely their own. She hadn't expected it. A connection so strong, so immediate, and yet there was something so natural about it. It was as if she had known him far longer than just the brief moments they'd shared in passing. This particular Thursday morning, Emma found herself lingering by the school's front steps after class, waiting for the bus. The sky was overcast, thick clouds hanging low, and there was a familiar chill in the air. The storm, which had been brewing all day, was finally ready to break. The first drop of rain splashed against the pavement, and Emma tilted her head back, welcoming the coolness against her face. She didn't notice Luke until he was standing next to her, as though he had appeared out of nowhere, his presence like a soft whisper in the wind. Does it feel like the world's holding its breath, or is it just me? Luke's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper. His eyes met hers with that same quiet intensity that had drawn her to him from the very first moment. Emma's lips parted, unsure of how to answer. She smiled, her gaze still lingering on him. "Maybe it's the rain," she said softly, her voice more vulnerable than she intended. "But yeah, it does. Like something's about to change." Luke nodded, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. And there was something about the way he carried himself that made her feel as though he, too, was waiting for something that neither of them could name. A few moments passed in silence as the rain began to pour in earnest, soaking the world around them. The school courtyard emptied, students rushing for shelter, but Emma remained rooted in place, feeling an odd sense of peace wash over her. Luke, too, seemed unaffected by the downpour. They stood there for a few minutes, letting the rain soak them, the sound of it tapping against the pavement almost soothing. It was Luke who spoke first, breaking the quiet intimacy between them. "You ever feel like you're trapped in a moment, but you don't know how to get out of it?" He tilted his head slightly, eyes studying her face. Emma hesitated, feeling a strange sense of recognition at his words. "All the time," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Like everything around me is moving, but I'm stuck." Luke's gaze softened, and for a moment, Emma could see the layers behind his eyes, his own quiet battles that mirrored hers more than she cared to admit. "Yeah," he murmured. "I get that. It's like you're waiting for something to happen, something to change, but you don't know how or when it will come." The rain soaked them both now, the chill of it creeping into her skin, but the warmth of his presence kept her grounded, tethered in this fragile moment. Emma didn't know why she was sharing so much with him. There was a part of her that felt vulnerable, but another part, a larger part, felt safe. Safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "I've been feeling that a lot lately," she confessed, her voice low, barely above a whisper. "Like everything's slipping through my fingers. My family, everything's just different now. And I can't do anything to fix it." Luke nodded, his eyes darkening with understanding. "I get that. Sometimes it feels like the harder you try to hold on, the more things slip away. Like you're the only one still trying, and everyone else is moving on without you." Emma's heart tightened, the raw honesty of his words cutting through her in a way she didn't expect. She didn't know how he understood her so well after such a short time, but there it was, a quiet connection between them, built not on words, but on the shared experiences they hadn't spoken about. "You're not the only one who feels that way," he added, his voice gentle, but the intensity in his eyes said more than words ever could. For a moment, Emma felt like she could tell him everything. She could tell him about Greg, about the way her stepdad had drifted from her, about the silence that had settled between them. She could tell him about the way her heart ached every time she watched her family slip further away. But instead, she simply nodded, taking a step closer to him, the rain now completely drenching them both. "You're different," she said softly, almost to herself. "I don't know why, but you are." Luke's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, and for the first time since they had met, Emma saw a flicker of something in his eyes, Something deeper, more intimate. You're different too, he said quietly, in a way that makes me want to understand you more. I'm not in a hurry to figure it all out, though. I think it's better if things just unfold. Emma's breath caught in her throat at his words, the weight of them heavy with an unspoken promise. There was something about him that made her feel like she could breathe again. Like for the first time in a long time, she didn't have to hide behind walls or pretend to be okay. With him, she didn't have to wear a mask. A gust of wind blew through the courtyard, sending a chill through Emma's body. Luke stepped a little closer, closing the gap between them. His arm brushed against hers, and the contact, however brief, sent a ripple of warmth through her skin. It was as if the world had momentarily stilled, leaving only the two of them standing there in the rain. I'm not going anywhere, Emma, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but the certainty in it made her heart skip a beat. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. The way he looked at her, the way he made her feel, was something she couldn't explain, and it left her with a sense of longing she couldn't name. Just as the last of the rain began to ease, Luke gave her a small, encouraging smile. Come on, he said. Let's get out of here before we catch a cold. Emma hesitated for only a moment before nodding, the feeling between them stronger than ever. The connection was undeniable, and as they walked side by side toward the school's entrance, Emma felt a spark inside her that she hadn't felt in so long. The world, for once, seemed a little less heavy. The weight of the past few weeks had settled deep inside Emma's chest, tightening her breath with each passing day. She had been trying to ignore the changes, but it felt impossible now. Her stepdad, Greg, had continued to shower Jack with attention-expensive gifts, weekend trips. The kind of attention that Emma had once taken for granted. The most recent gift, a brand-new gaming console, had come with a flourish. The box wrapped in shiny paper that reflected the artificial glow of Greg's smile. Emma had stood there, in the corner of the living room, watching Jack rip open the packaging, his face lighting up as if the world was finally giving him everything he ever wanted. Meanwhile, Emma felt invisible. She had tried, really tried, to keep her resentment at bay, to tell herself it didn't matter, but it did. Each gesture Greg made toward Jack was another reminder of how far apart they had grown, how much she had been replaced. The sound of laughter from the living room cut through her thoughts. It was the same laughter that used to be hers, the same moments she used to share with Greg, but now they felt distant. She gripped the edge of the counter in the kitchen, the cold marble against her fingertips grounding her, but it didn't stop the ache in her chest. She had to leave. She needed air, space to think. Without a second thought, Emma grabbed her coat and slipped out the back door. The evening sky was dark, heavy clouds hanging low, the air thick with the threat of rain. The streets were nearly empty, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic. Emma walked aimlessly, her thoughts swirling, the familiar sting of abandonment tightening around her throat. When she reached the small park near her house, she stopped at the edge of the swing set, gazing out at the emptiness of the world around her. The park, once a place of childhood joy, now felt as empty as her heart got. Just as she was about to turn back, a voice broke through the silence. Hey! She turned, her heart skipping a beat. Luke was standing just a few feet away, looking every bit as out of place in this quiet park as she felt. Luke? She asked, surprised to see him here. She hadn't expected to run into him, but a small part of her was glad she had. Yeah, he said, offering a sheepish grin. I don't know. I thought I saw someone walk by. Figured I'd check. Emma raised an eyebrow, but his honesty made her smile. Are you stalking me now? She teased lightly, but the weight of her own frustration still lingered in her voice. Luke's smile faltered slightly, as if he sensed the underlying tension in her tone. He stepped closer, the soft crunch of gravel beneath his feet breaking the stillness. "I wasn't sure if I should interrupt, but you seemed off. Is everything okay?" Emma's breath caught. It wasn't just the words, but the sincerity in his voice. The way he looked at her, with something deeper than casual concern. It made her want to drop the walls she'd built up, the ones she had carefully constructed over the past few weeks. "I'm fine," she said quickly, more out of habit than truth. "Just, everything's been a lot lately." Luke nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "You don't have to pretend with me. You know." Her lips parted, surprised by his words, but the truth was, she didn't know how to respond. She had been pretending for so long to be okay, to be fine with everything. But she wasn't. "You don't understand?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. She hated how vulnerable she felt, but it was too late to take it back. "It's just ... my family. I don't know what's happening anymore. Jack gets all the attention, all the things, and I'm just here." Luke's expression shifted, something dark crossing his features. "I get it. I've been there. It's not easy when it feels like everyone else is getting what they need while you're left behind." Her heart stuttered at his words. He gets it. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, surprised by the depth of emotion in her voice. "I didn't mean to unload on you like that." He took a step closer, his eyes intense as they locked onto hers. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're not unloading. You're just talking. I get it, Emma. I know what it feels like to be on the outside, looking in. But you're not alone in this." A warmth spread through her chest at his words, and she looked away, feeling the familiar heat rise to her cheeks. It wasn't just the way he was looking at her. It was the way he understood her. She had been so used to being unseen, so used to feeling invisible, but Luke was offering her something she hadn't dared to hope for connection. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them standing in the park, the rain finally beginning to fall, soft at first, then harder. Luke didn't back away, though. Instead, he stepped even closer, his presence wrapping around her like a shield. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet urgency that made Emma's heart race. "I'll be here, whenever you need me." Emma's breath hitched, and she felt a sudden pull in her chest, a desire to reach out to him, to take the solace he was offering. But a voice in the back of her mind held her back. "What about your family?" She was torn between two worlds, her loyalty to her family, to the life she had always known, and the undeniable pull of something new, something real. With Luke, it wasn't just his presence that made her heart race, it was the connection. The way he saw her, not as the girl who had to fight for attention, but as someone who mattered. She started, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know how to explain it, how to explain the storm that was brewing inside her. She wanted him, but she couldn't just walk away from her family. Could she? The sound of a distant car engine broke through the silence, and Emma took a deep breath, her chest tightening. Luke reached out then, his fingers brushing against hers, a touch so soft, so tentative. His touch sparked a warmth in her that felt both familiar and new. His gaze never wavered from hers, and in that moment, she felt like the only thing that mattered in the world was standing right in front of her. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly, as if he could read the conflict in her eyes. Emma closed her eyes, her breath shallow, the rain pouring harder now, the world around them disappearing as the storm inside her continued to rage. The evening had felt like a dream. Emma and Luke had spent the past few hours together at the small, cozy cafe they had discovered on their weekend walks. The air had been filled with laughter and easy conversation, their connection stronger than ever. So undeniable, it felt as if it were something written in the stars. But now, as she stepped out of the cafe, something was different. The world felt a little colder, a little more distant. The usual spark in her chest, the warmth she always felt when she was near him, was flickering, replaced by an unsettling gnawing in her stomach. It was as if she had stepped back from the edge of something beautiful, but now she was uncertain whether she was holding on or falling. "Hey," Luke called out as he caught up to her, his smile warm, but there was a shadow behind his eyes that Emma hadn't seen before. "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine," Emma replied quickly, trying to brush it off. She didn't want to worry him, but the words felt hollow in her mouth. What was it? What had shifted? They continued walking, side by side, the sound of their footsteps in sync. But the tension, the unfamiliar quiet between them, was suffocating. Emma could feel her heart rate quicken, her chest tightening with every step. The closer they got to her house, the more her mind spiraled. It wasn't just her own unease. It was something in the air between them. She didn't know how to explain it, but it felt like a door had closed, and she was left on the other side, staring in. They reached the corner of her street, just a block away from her house. Luke stopped abruptly, his eyes studying her face in a way that made her stomach flip. "Emma," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you." She turned toward him, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" Luke hesitated, as if unsure of how to proceed. The expression on his face was hard to read, guarded, maybe, or conflicted. Emma's pulse quickened, the unease in her gut deepening. I didn't want to keep this from you," he began, his words measured, careful. "But you deserve to know." Emma felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What are you talking about, Luke?" Before he could answer, Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket, a jarring interruption. She pulled it out quickly, distracted by the incoming message. It was a text from her brother, Jack. "Come home now. You're going to want to hear this." Her heart skipped. Jack never sent urgent texts. Her gaze darted back to Luke, but he was staring at the ground, his hands shoved into his pockets, his posture stiff and tense. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air, thick with unspoken words. Before she could say anything, Luke spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma," but the words stopped short as they both heard it, a conversation floating from an open window just down the street, carried by the wind. Emma's heart froze in her chest as she recognized the voices. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this from her," came the voice of a man. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was Luke's voice. "I've been seeing her for weeks now," he continued, the words cutting through her like ice. "But she can't know about what happened with my ex. It's too complicated." Her mind went blank. Her legs wobbled as she stumbled back, almost falling. "What?" The air around her seemed to collapse, leaving her dizzy, her thoughts spinning. She couldn't breathe. The conversation continued, too muffled now to make out all the details, but the fragments, the words she could catch, were enough to send a jolt of disbelief through her. ... She can never know. It would ruin everything with Emma. She's too ... too perfect. Her chest felt hollow, as if something inside her had shattered into 1,000 pieces. The realization was slow, painful like a blade sliding deep into her heart. Luke was hiding something from her. Something huge. What was it? She turned to face him, her hands trembling at her sides, her mind racing. What was that? Her voice cracked, the disbelief heavy in every syllable. "What are you hiding from me, Luke?" Luke didn't look up at her at first. When he finally did, his expression was a mixture of guilt and fear, and Emma felt her world slip from under her. "Emma, he began, but Emma shook her head, unable to hear any more. "No," she said, her voice rising with a tremor. "You need to tell me what's going on. Right now." He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes searching for words that would explain it all, but nothing came. Emma felt the distance between them widen with every passing second. She had trusted him, let herself open up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone in so long. And now it felt like all of it was a lie. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "But there's more to the story than you know. I'm not the person you think I am." Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't from affection or longing anymore. It was anger, betrayal. She felt her world crumble, the pieces scattering as she tried to piece together what was real and what was false. "Who are you?" she whispered, the words barely audible as they scraped from her throat. "Who are you, Luke?" His gaze fell again, and the silence between them stretched long, unbearable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. "But I need you to know this wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But I can't keep lying to you, Emma." The words hit her like a ton of bricks, the finality of them slamming into her chest. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that everything she thought she knew about him, about them, was built on a foundation of half-truths and secrets. Emma shook her head, trying to steady herself, but she could feel the cracks widening inside her. I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking as the words left her lips. Luke stepped toward her, his face filled with regret, but Emma took a step back, her heart screaming for distance. "Please, Emma," he began, but Emma turned away, her steps fast and shaky, her breath ragged as she fled, not knowing where she was going, only knowing that she needed to escape. The storm inside her wasn't just the rain, it was everything she had believed in, everything she thought was real, slipping through her fingers. The storm had come suddenly, the sky darkening as if to match the weight of the tension between them. Emma could feel it the growing distance. It wasn't just the words they had left unspoken. It wasn't just the secrets she had uncovered. It was something deeper, something more primal, like the cracks in the earth, waiting to split wide open. She walked in silence beside Luke, the rain falling steadily around them, soaking through their clothes, making everything feel more urgent, more suffocating. She couldn't look at him, not yet. Not until she had the words. "Luke," Emma said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I don't understand. How could you lie to me like that?" Her words felt like a punch, but they were barely enough to vent the storm inside her chest. Luke walked a few steps ahead of her, his hands shoved into his pockets, his posture stiff. He didn't turn to face her. He couldn't. Not yet. The silence between them was thick, pressing in on all sides, but Emma couldn't bear it anymore. "I didn't lie," Luke finally said, his voice flat, as though the words meant nothing to him. But Emma knew better. The way his shoulders were set, the tightness in his jaw, it wasn't indifference. It was guilt. Then what was it? She demanded, stepping closer to him. "You kept something from me, Luke. Something that changes everything." Luke stopped walking, but he didn't turn around. The rain was heavier now, soaking through their clothes, clinging to their skin, but it felt like nothing compared to the coldness that had settled between them. "I never wanted you to find out like this," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "I didn't want to hurt you, Emma." "Then why did you?" Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. She had been so sure of him, of them. And now, everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. "Why didn't you tell me? Why keep the secret?" "I didn't want to lose you," Luke said, the words heavy with something Emma couldn't place fear. Desperation? Emma shook her head, the tears she had been holding back threatening to fall. "But you already did. You did lose me. Luke, You don't get to just pretend like everything's fine when you've been lying to me this whole time." The storm raged on around them, the wind whipping her hair across her face, the rain blurring her vision. But she wasn't sure if it was the rain or the hurt that made everything so hard to see. Luke turned then, his expression torn, but Emma couldn't read it. She didn't want to anymore. "You don't understand," Luke said, his voice desperate now. "I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. But I've been trying to fix things, trying to make up for the past." Emma felt a sharp pain in her chest. "Fix things?" she repeated, her voice bitter. "By lying to me?" "Emma," Luke said, his tone soft, almost pleading. "I didn't want to hurt you. You're the only person who's ever made me feel alive. The only one who's ever made me want to be better." Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let herself be swayed. "Then why didn't you tell me the truth? Why did you keep this from me?" Luke took a step forward, his hands outstretched as if to touch her, but Emma stepped back, the pain too sharp to ignore. "I was afraid," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Afraid of losing you before we even started. But now I realize I've already lost you." The words hit Emma harder than she expected, and for a moment she stood there, frozen. The weight of his confession pressed on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She hadn't expected him to admit it. She hadn't expected him to be so vulnerable, but she couldn't forgive him. "Not yet. I don't know if I can trust you anymore," Emma said, her voice barely more than a whisper. She had to say it. She had to put the distance between them before it consumed her completely. Luke's face twisted with anguish, his eyes searching hers as if begging for a sign, for anything to show her that he was still the man she had fallen for. "I never wanted to hurt you," he repeated, stepping closer again, but Emma shook her head, taking another step back. "I know you didn't want to," she said, her voice shaking with the effort to hold herself together. "But you did, and I don't know if I can forgive you for that." The storm seemed to intensify, the wind whipping harder around them, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside Emma. She felt as though the very ground beneath her was crumbling, as though the world around her had suddenly become unfamiliar. She had loved him. She had believed in him. But now the truth was too much to bear. "Please, Emma," Luke said, his voice raw, desperate. "I'm sorry. I never meant for you to find out like this. But you have to know, I never wanted to lose you. I don't know what I'd do without you." Her heart twisted at his words, but she couldn't let herself soften. Not now. Not when the foundation of everything they had was built on lies. "You already lost me," Emma whispered, her words barely audible over the rain. "You lost me the moment you decided to keep that secret from me." And with that, she turned away, her footsteps heavy as she walked toward the street, leaving Luke standing there, his voice calling her name. But she couldn't look back. She couldn't give him the chance to make it right when the hurt was too deep, too raw. The rain soaked her through as she walked, the chill seeping into her bones. But it was nothing compared to the cold that had settled in her heart. The days that followed the argument felt like they moved through a haze, slow, muffled, and unyielding. Emma tried to get back into her routine, burying herself in schoolwork, pretending that the world hadn't shifted beneath her feet. The quiet in her house was more oppressive than she remembered. Her mom, wrapped up in her own world, didn't seem to notice. Jack was wrapped up in his own excitement, the new gaming console still absorbing every ounce of his attention. But Emma? She was suffocating in the silence. The seat beside her in class was empty, and though she kept her head down, focusing on the work in front of her, there was no avoiding the emptiness of it all. The words Luke had said to her, the anger in his voice, echoed in her mind like a ghost, refusing to let her forget. His confession, his fear of losing her, had been real, but so was his lie. "I never wanted to hurt you," he'd said. And yet, every lie had torn her apart. Her heart twisted, a familiar ache gnawing sides. She had never been the type to dwell on things, to replay arguments over and over in her mind. But with Luke, it was different. Their connection had felt so real, so undeniable. Was it all just an illusion? She wondered. Had he ever truly meant what he said? The quiet in her room at night was almost unbearable. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting back to him, the way he had looked at her when they first met, the way they had laughed over nothing, the way his touch had felt like coming home. She would close her eyes and pretend, for just a moment, that everything was the way it had been. But then the cold reality of what had happened would seep back in, and she would feel the familiar sting in her chest. The weather outside was bleak, a reflection of her mood. The sky was gray, clouds heavy and threatening, and Emma found herself walking to the bus stop, her steps quick but aimless. She had tried to put it all behind her, tried to focus on her family, her friends, her future. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something important. She had spent the morning in the library, reading through assignments, trying to focus on the work in front of her. But every time her thoughts wandered, they wandered back to Luke. What if he's not thinking about me? She wondered. What if it was all just a passing moment for him, and I'm the one who's holding on to something that never was? The bus ride felt longer than usual. The noise of the engine and the murmur of conversations around her, nothing more than a dull hum. Her mind was too busy, too chaotic to focus on anything else. She couldn't stop herself from wondering, did I make a mistake? Should I have let him in? It wasn't just the fight. It was the silence that followed. It was the absence of him. Where is he now? She had no idea where he went after they'd fought. Had he gone back to his ex? Had he moved on? Or was he somewhere, just as lost as she was, regretting everything that had happened? She pulled her coat tighter around her, the weight of the cold air mirroring the weight in her chest. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the pain of what had happened, or the uncertainty of what had never even been given a chance to grow. That night, after dinner, Emma retreated to her room. Her mom had tried to talk to her about something, but Emma had barely heard a word. She had smiled and nodded, as if she were there, but her mind was somewhere else. Somewhere she didn't want to be. She sat on her bed, the quiet of her room swallowing her whole. Her phone sat on the nightstand, silent. She hadn't heard from Luke in days, and as much as she tried to convince herself that she was better off without him, her heart refused to listen. Why hasn't he called? She wondered. Why hasn't he tried to fix this? She had told herself that she was fine, that she didn't need anyone to complete her. But the absence of him, the absence of their conversations, of their connection, it felt like a void inside her that nothing could fill. Emma stared at the phone, willing it to light up. Just a text, just a sign, anything to show that she wasn't the only one who felt the distance. But the screen stayed dark. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, a familiar ache she had been trying to avoid. She wanted to pick up the phone and reach out to him, to break the silence, to fix whatever it was that had gone wrong. But the fear, the uncertainty, held her back. What if he didn't want to hear from her? What if he had moved on? The words from their fight echoed in her mind. I'm not the person you think I am, Dot. And for the first time, Emma began to wonder if maybe he had been right. Maybe she had built him up in her mind into something he wasn't. Maybe everything about them, everything she had thought was real, was just a fleeting moment. Maybe she had been chasing a dream that was never meant to come true. Later that night, Emma stood by the window, staring out at the rain. The sound of it against the glass was hypnotic, a steady rhythm that matched the heavy beat of her heart. It was as if the world outside was trying to wash away everything, the pain, the doubt, the uncertainty. She had spent the last few days pretending, pretending to be okay, pretending that it didn't hurt, pretending that she could move on from Luke and the moments they had shared. But the longer she pretended, the more the emptiness gnawed at her dots. Suddenly, she heard the sound of her phone buzzing from the nightstand, and her heart skipped a beat. She reached for it quickly, her pulse racing as she unlocked the screen. "A message from Luke. Can we talk?" Emma stared at the words, her heart pounding in her chest. What does he want now? She felt a rush of conflicting emotions: relief, anger, longing, fear. But one thing was certain: she couldn't ignore it. With shaking hands, she typed a quick reply. "Why?" Seconds later, his message came through. "I need you to hear me out. Please." Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to say so much. She wanted to scream, to ask him why he had stayed away for so long, why he had let the distance between them grow. But instead, she just stared at the message, her finger hovering over the keys, unsure of what to do. The silence was broken. But would it be enough to heal the storm inside her? Or was this just the beginning of another heartbreak? The late afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows on the sidewalk as Emma walked home from school. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and the world felt muted, distant. She hadn't seen Luke since that painful night in the rain, since the moment he'd confessed his lies, his fears, his regrets, and since she had walked away from him, her heart heavy with the weight of betrayal. She had tried to move on, to bury the confusion and the ache, but the silence had only made everything more unbearable. She had spent days replaying his words in her head, wondering if there was any truth to what he said. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for it to go this far." But even with those words echoing in her mind, she couldn't escape the doubt that lingered, like a dark cloud above her. Did he mean it? Or was it just another part of the lies that had torn them apart? Her heart still ached, but a strange sense of calm washed over her as she walked the familiar path home. Maybe the hurt would fade with time. Maybe she'd learn to live without him. She didn't know. She couldn't even begin to imagine what a life without Luke would look like. Just as she turned the corner toward her street, she heard it. The sound of footsteps behind her, soft but steady. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The tension in the air, the way the world seemed to pause, she knew. Emma. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Luke. She didn't move, couldn't move, as if her feet were glued to the ground. She stood there for a long moment, gathering the courage to face him, to hear whatever it was he had to say. But she couldn't look at him, not yet. Not until she was ready to face the pain. Finally, she turned around, her eyes meeting his. Luke stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. But there was something there, something raw, something vulnerable. "Why are you here?" Emma asked, her voice tight. The anger she had tried to bury for the past few days bubbled to the surface. "What do you want from me, Luke?" His face softened at the question, the guilt that had been there before, now tinged with something deeper: regret, maybe. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly, his words heavy with meaning. "I need you to understand, to know the truth." Emma's chest tightened at his words. "The truth?" she echoed, her voice laced with bitterness. "After everything, you think the truth is enough? You think I can just forgive you and move on?" Luke took a step closer, but Emma took a step back, as though trying to protect herself from whatever was coming next. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Emma," he said, his voice strained. "I'm asking you to listen, to understand why I did what I did." She shook her head, her breath shaky. "You're asking too much," she whispered, her hands trembling at her sides. She didn't want to hear it, didn't want to listen to the reasons behind his actions. All she could feel was the sting of his betrayal. What could you possibly say that will make any of this make sense? I wasn't trying to hurt you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was trying to protect you. From my past. From things I couldn't change. Emma's heart ached at his words, but the bitterness still clung to her. She crossed her arms over her chest, fighting the sudden rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Protect me? By lying to me? By keeping me in the dark about everything? Luke's face fell, the weight of her words clearly hitting him harder than she had expected. I didn't know how to tell you, he admitted, his voice breaking. I didn't know how to explain the mess that I was. I was trying to fix myself, trying to become someone worthy of you, and in doing so, I pushed you away. I never meant for any of it to happen. I never meant to hurt you. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Then what was all of it? The secrets, the lies, the silence? You think I don't see it? You think I don't feel it? Luke took another step toward her, his eyes pleading. It wasn't about you, he said softly. It was about me. I've made mistakes, Emma. I've hurt people in the past, people I cared about. But when I met you, everything changed. You made me believe I could be someone better. And I didn't want to risk losing that. Her breath caught in her throat as she absorbed his words, the vulnerability in his voice knocking the wind out of her. She could see the pain in his eyes, the same pain she had seen in the mirror every night since they'd fought. But you didn't trust me, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. You didn't trust me enough to let me in. To let me help you. Luke's face twisted with regret, his hands trembling at his sides. I was afraid, he confessed, the words tumbling out of him like an avalanche. Afraid of losing you. Afraid that if you knew everything, you wouldn't see me the same way. I thought I could fix it on my own. I thought I could protect you by keeping it all buried. But now, ... He swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving hers. Now I see how wrong I was. Emma's chest ached at the honesty in his words, but there was still a part of her that couldn't let go of the hurt. The hurt of being left in the dark, of being lied to. You should have trusted me, Luke, she said, her voice breaking. I'm not perfect, but I would have listened. I would have understood. You didn't have to carry it all alone. The rain had started to fall harder now, the soft pitter-patter on the pavement echoing in the silence between them. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, the tension thick between them, as if the world was waiting for them to make a decision. I'm sorry, Luke said, his voice barely a whisper now, full of rawness. I'm so sorry, Emma. The words hung in the air between them, but Emma wasn't sure if she could believe them. Could she really forgive him? Could she trust him again after everything that had happened? The storm inside her was still raging, the confusion and the pain still swirling in her chest. She felt torn between the desire to reach out and the fear that doing so would only lead to more heartbreak. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emma looked up at him, her eyes soft but filled with uncertainty. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rain. But I'm listening. I'm here. Luke's eyes softened, the relief in his gaze clear. That's all I can ask for, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Emma nodded slowly, the weight of the decision heavy in her chest. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet. But for the first time in days, the storm inside her began to calm, if only a little. There was still so much to work through, so much pain to heal. But maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward. The rain had begun again, softer this time, a steady rhythm that drummed against the window pane, as if the world itself was sighing in relief. Emma stood by the glass, her hand pressed against the cold surface, staring out at the storm that had swept across the city. It had been a few days since their conversation in the park. Since the words of truth had finally been spoken, and though things were still uncertain, there was something different now. Luke had kept his distance, as if waiting for her to decide whether or not she could find a way to forgive him. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't begged. But every time she saw him, there was that familiar tug in her chest, a pull she couldn't ignore, a connection that had only deepened despite everything that had happened. The hurt, the betrayal, it was still there, but so was the love. Emma had told herself she wasn't ready, that she needed time, space to heal. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized, was there ever really a time when I wasn't ready? She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the soft sound of the rain fill her senses, as if she were letting it wash away all the doubt, all the questions that had been haunting her. She had been waiting for the right moment to face the storm inside her. And now, standing in the quiet of her room, with the rain falling outside, she knew it was time. A knock at the door broke through her thoughts, and her heart gave a little lurch. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Emma? Luke's voice came through the door, tentative, almost hesitant, as though he feared she might turn him away. "Can we talk?" She swallowed hard, her breath shaky. The door between them felt like both a barrier and a lifeline. She didn't know if she was ready for this, but a part of her already knew that she had to face it. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door, and there he stood, drenched from the rain, his hair tousled, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. He looked like he had come through the storm, both literally and figuratively, and something in his eyes made her chest tighten. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," Luke said, his voice quiet but steady. "But I need you to know something." Emma felt a wave of emotion threaten to overwhelm her. She stepped aside, wordlessly inviting him in. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze falling to the floor before he walked in. His footsteps muffled on the hardwood floor dot. The silence between them was thick, charged, filled with everything that had been said and unsaid. Luke stood in the middle of the room, his hands hanging by his sides, as if he didn't know where to put them. Emma remained standing by the door, unsure of what to say, but the tension between them was impossible to ignore. It felt like the calm before the storm. Luke looked up at her, his eyes dark and full of something she couldn't quite place. "I know I hurt you," he said softly, his words slow and deliberate. "I know I lied, and I know I can't take that back. But I need you to understand. The last thing I ever wanted to do was hurt you. I never wanted to cause you this pain." Emma felt the sting of his words deep in her chest. She had heard him say similar things before, but this time there was something different in his voice. Something real. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know you didn't mean to, but it still hurts. It still hurts so much." Luke stepped closer, but Emma didn't back away. She felt rooted to the spot, as if her heart was pulling her toward him, despite the confusion that still clouded her mind. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything. I wish I could go back and do it all differently. But I can't. All I can do is tell you the truth now." She stared at him, her eyes searching his face for something, anything that would give her clarity. "Then tell me," she said, her voice cracking. "Tell me everything. No more lies." Luke nodded, his expression softening, and for a moment it seemed as if the weight of his confession was too much to bear. "I was afraid," he admitted, his voice faltering. "Afraid of losing you before I even had a chance to really have you. I kept running from the past, from the things I didn't want to deal with, and in doing that, I hurt the one person I never wanted to hurt." The sincerity in his voice was enough to make Emma's heart break all over again. She swallowed the lump in her throat, the storm inside her still raging. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, she whispered, her words soft but heavy. I need time. Luke's face tightened with the weight of her words, but he didn't move away. He didn't turn his back on her. Instead, he took another step forward, his voice quiet but firm. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes, Emma. I'll give you all the time you need. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had lost. The rain was still falling softly, the sound a constant presence in the background, as though the world was holding its breath. Emma's chest tightened, the weight of her emotions too much to bear, and before she could stop herself, she closed the distance between them. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched his arm, her fingertips grazing the wet fabric of his jacket. Luke's eyes softened, his breath hitching at the contact. Without a word, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers, as if afraid to push too hard, to move too quickly. And then, without thinking, Emma lifted her head, meeting his lips with a kiss that was hesitant at first, like two people walking on shaky ground, unsure of where they stood. But the moment his lips touched hers, everything fell away, the doubt, the anger, the fear, and all that was left was the warmth of their connection, the electricity that still hummed between them. The kiss deepened, and Emma felt herself melting into him, the world outside fading into nothing. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise. A promise that they weren't done yet, that they could still fight for what they had. The rain outside intensified, but inside there was a calm. The storm inside her had quieted, and in its place was something new, a fragile hope. Like the first rays of sunlight after the darkest night, when they finally pulled away, both of them breathless, Luke smiled, his eyes full of tenderness. We'll get through this, he said softly, his thumb brushing against her cheek. One step at a time. Emma nodded, her heart still racing in her chest. One step at a time, she echoed. The sun rose slowly, casting a golden light over the city that felt somehow different. Emma stood at the window, her hand resting against the cool glass, watching as the world below her came to life. It had been weeks since that night in the rain, since the storm that had torn them apart, only to bring them back together again. Not in the time since. Everything had changed. Luke had changed. She had changed. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, there was a quiet sense of hope in Emma's heart that hadn't been there before. The weight of the past, the lies, the pain hadn't disappeared, but it no longer had a hold on her. Not in the way it once did. She closed her eyes, taking in the warmth of the morning, the soft hum of the world coming to life around her. The silence was different now, filled with the possibility of new beginnings. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her thoughts, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Luke. She could feel his presence like a magnet pulling her toward him. Without saying a word, he stepped up beside her, standing in the quiet space between the window and the world beyond. I've been thinking about us, he said, his voice soft, but filled with something Emma hadn't heard before, certainty. About everything we've been through. The pain, the mistakes, the brokenness. I want you to know, I'm not the same person I was before. I've learned from this. From us. Emma's heart skipped a beat at his words, a rush of emotions she hadn't quite expected flooding through her. She could feel the sincerity in his voice, the weight of his apology, but more than that, she felt something else, a promise. A promise to try to rebuild, to move forward together. I know you've been through a lot, she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. And I know that I have too. But it's different now, isn't it? We're different. Luke nodded slowly, his eyes not leaving hers. We are, he agreed, his voice gentle but firm. But that doesn't mean it's too late for us. We still have time. We still have each other." For a moment, Emma just stood there, feeling the weight of his words, feeling the shift in the air between them. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the weight of their shared history and the possibility of what could come next. She turned to him then, her hand reaching out to touch his, the simple act grounding her in the present moment. She could feel his warmth, the steadiness of his touch, and it was like everything around them fell away, the doubts, the fears, the insecurities. They were here, together. "I don't know what the future holds," Emma said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to face it with you. I want to rebuild everything that we've lost. One step at a time." Luke's expression softened, and for a moment, it felt like the world had paused around them. "I'm ready," he said, his voice full of raw emotion. "I've always been ready, and I know it won't be easy. But I want to do this. For us. For you." There was something in his eyes, something deep and genuine, that made Emma feel like maybe, just maybe, they could truly move past the hurt. That they could start again, leaving the broken pieces of their past behind them, and stepping into the future together. Hand in hand, the weeks that followed felt like a delicate dance, a series of quiet, tender moments woven together by trust and vulnerability. Emma and Luke found their rhythm again, one step at a time, learning to navigate the new dynamics of their relationship, still tinged with the remnants of the past, but filled with a sense of hope they hadn't known before. There were days when the weight of the past still hung in the air between them, like a shadow they couldn't quite shake. But there were more days when the silence between them was no longer heavy, it was comforting, filled with understanding, shared glances, and quiet smiles that spoke louder than words ever could. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch of the house Emma had grown up in, the sun setting behind them, she found herself looking at Luke as though seeing him for the first time. Really seeing him. He had always been there, standing by her, waiting for her, even when she hadn't been ready to accept him. But now, in the quiet of that moment, she realized just how much they had both grown, how much they had both fought for this. For each other. "I never thought we'd make it here," Emma said softly, her voice full of wonder, her gaze still locked on his. "I never thought I'd be able to look at you and feel like everything is going to be okay." Luke's hand found hers, his fingers wrapping around hers in a familiar, comforting grip. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But here we are, and I don't want to waste another moment questioning what we have. I want to live in it. I want to be here with you." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with warmth as she squeezed his hand. "Then let's do that. Let's live in this moment, together." They sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the world around them bathed in the golden light of a new beginning. Emma leaned her head against Luke's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt at peace. The months that followed were filled with small, beautiful moments, each one a testament to the love they were rebuilding. They took things slowly, but their connection grew stronger with every step they took together. The weight of their past was still there, but it no longer had the power to tear them apart. They had learned to face it, together. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, the soft crackle of the flames filling the room, Luke turned to her with a look she couldn't quite place. His expression was serious, but there was something tender in his eyes. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice full of emotion, "I don't know if I've said this enough, but I love you. I've always loved you, and I'm not going anywhere." Emma's heart swelled at his words, the familiar warmth flooding her chest. She had always known, deep down, that Luke had loved her. But hearing it now, after everything they'd been through, made it feel real in a way it never had before. "I love you, too," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I always have." They shared a kiss then, soft and slow, a promise of all the tomorrows they would face together. It wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something new, something built on love, trust, and the understanding that, no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side.